So, okay, I guess it is the 3rd of September in 2011, and we have the pleasure of interviewing Bill Schindler. So, Bill, I'll just be asking some questions, and you can just very simply answer them. And like I said, any stories or any memories along the way. So, to begin with, Bill, where were you born?
I'm born in Blackfoot, Idaho.
About what year?
1927.
27.
On the 30th of May.
And your parents were?
My dad was Fred Schindler. My mother was Lena Jacobson Schindler. And Dad was a traveling salesman. And he was into this country every 3 weeks, as long as he could get in here.
Now, I think I remember reading something about he may have been a candy salesman at one point in time.
Yes, he was a salesman for Sweets Candy Company, and he covered, like I say, these 3 areas: Blackfoot, Ketchum, and Stanley, with the surrounding areas. His territory was 3 weeks long.
Three weeks of traveling then.
So every 3rd week he got into Stanley, and when he was in Ketchum, that was even close to Stanley, closer than Blackfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And
so your father, Fred Schindler, other than being a traveling salesman, it's rather apparent that he must have had quite an interest in mining or geology.
he was raised in Salt Lake City. I'll tell you a little bit about him.
Mm-hmm.
His yearbook stated that no one was like Fred Schindler, because he would answer every question right down the line. He would not be stumped, and he never had anything short of an A in school. He only took 2 years of high school, which was possible in those days, and his mother died when he was a little guy, and so he took it upon himself to go to work and take care of his young brothers. So he would work work for that two-year program, and then, instead of going to school himself, which he would have loved to do, he opted to take care of his family. And so he worked for a mining company for a period of time in the Salt Lake area. And I guess that's what got him started in that thing. And then having to take care of his brothers, he looked for every kind of a good job that he could get, and candy salesman was the job. So he started in that, and he traveled for 3 weeks of them every 3rd period. He'd be up here, and he fell in love with his country, and then he became acquainted with Bill Soule. Bill had moved to this country from the Midwest, and he had acquired the Valley Creek mine. And so Dad agreed with him to help him further advance the mining and get to where they can make something out of it. And after a period of time, they concluded that they needed to advertise for lease. They had, actually the mine had been started, and I think it must have been during the Great Depression that it was closed.
Right.
And so they closed the mine and Bill Soule acquired it. And Dad went in as a full partner. And he would, he would go looking for various places of ore and things of that nature. And he would spend time with us every time he had a chance. In fact, he could spend more time with us at Valley Creek than he could in Blackfoot because he was close to Haiti and he was close to Stanley.
Okay, so then if he basically really, thanks to Bill Soule and their working together, about what time did that mean the family tended to come up here? Were you up here just once in a while? Did you come up and stay up here? Were you here just in the summers? That sort of thing.
Basically, it was the summers because we had a home in Blackfoot. I went to school there, and the minute September came, I was in school until the 30th of May. And so we would go to school, and then as soon as school was over, why, he would bring his family up here, except during canning season. Mother canned a lot of fruit. We had bottle after haul full of fruit. And so we survived on that because she was very frugal and very hard worker. But when we got up here and spent time, he would hire a couple of men, one or two men, to work the mine and get it prepared for leasing.
Do you remember what year or what age you first came up here to Stanley?
The first time we came to Stanley was probably 30 or 40 days after I was born.
Ah, okay. And so then most every summer you were coming up here then.
Oh, yes.
And what age do you remember coming to Stanley? Do you remember the trip, or do you remember how long it took, or do you remember seeing the difference between this and Blackfoot home?
Well, actually, we, I was 5 years old when we started coming up here regularly. I think I was 5 years old when we went into that partnership.
Uh-huh.
But the times that we came up before that 5 years, we were just traveling with Dad's territory. And so I had acquaintanceship with the country for a long time.
For a very long time. You were traveling up in an old car, and it was a pretty long trip for a youngster, I'll bet.
I think that if we didn't have any problems, we could get here in 7 hours.
7 hours from Blackfoot.
That's what I remember. I might be shortchanging myself.
And that was over Galena Summit
No.
or
No,
Chalice?
Well, if we were coming over from Haley, it was over Galena. But if we were coming from Blackfoot, we'd be coming up through Arco and Bay and such as that.
Remember what the roads were like?
They were deplorable. We lost paved road before we got to Mackey. And we found ways when we were coming up from Blackfoot to go on some of the off-country roads. And I can remember at least one time that we met a car on this very narrow road. My dad had to back up. It seemed to me like an awful long time. But there was road work, and then ultimately when they started the building of the bigger roads, why they'd stop us in the middle of a highway while they were blasting the new road, and they were not kind at all, because if we were close to the blasting, they'd park us right in the middle of the highway with the sun bearing down on us, no shade, and beastly hot. So anyway.
So it was a pretty big journey each time, and then when they started that highway construction, I believe that was in the middle 30s when they were doing that highway construction.
Yeah. And that continued probably for quite a while.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But we didn't get any paved highway until way later on.
So how many were in your family at the time when you first were coming up?
Well, first coming up, there was only 3 of us, my dad and mom and me, because I was the oldest.
Right.
Then I had a brother that came 3 years after me, and by the time we came up here as partners, I was 5 years old. So that would have been 5 years from the 1927.
Okay. Very good. As kids, for instance, when you and your brother were here in the summertime, you were out at the mine and your father was probably working real hard. What do you remember doing as kids? Were you working, or were you playing, or were you having fun?
Well, we were mostly playing, especially when we were very young. The cabin area was quite a dangerous area. One of the cabins was the old cook cabin. The logs had all tumbled down. There was an open pit well, and we were absolutely, there was absolute demand that we stay away from that. We also were demanded to stay away from the fish pond. Bill Soule had a pond full of about 60 or 80 trout in that pond. It was about 6 foot deep, and that was quite an attraction for a bunch of kids. Anyway, we were told absolutely do not go to that pond without an adult. Mm-hmm. And we would try to catch grasshoppers and black flies and so forth. And every time Bill Soule came to town, if the store had any hamburger, he'd buy a gob of hamburger to feed to those trout.
So,
And you can imagine what those trout did. They just boiled that water trying to get to that hamburger or that horsefly or wherever it was.
did anyone ever get to fish on those trout?
No, we would be very unpopular. The only thing I ever did that came close to it is that I tied a string to a ball of something, and I hung onto the string and threw it out in the pond. And one of the fish got it, and I was afraid Mr. Soule would come up when that string was hanging out of that fish's mouth, but he didn't.
So, speaking of fishing, did you ever go fishing down on Valley Creek? Were you allowed to venture that far as young kids?
As we got older, or as we had company, or adults. But when I was first up there, Bill Soule told Dad of a little stream that he could take us to fish. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because we went up East Valley Creek, and when you got up to East Valley Creek, there was a very steep canyon, and there was a little tiny stream that trickled down that down that stream, that trail.
I think they might call that Prospect Creek. I think that's what it's been named. I know exactly where you mean.
And we called it Little Evergreen Creek.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, Dad took us up that creek with Bill Soule's mention, and I had a telescopic rod that I could take it out to your 8 foot, but usually stayed down to 5 or 6 feet. And it was so fun, and I've never seen it like that since. But on that one day that we went, Dad took Stan, my younger brother, on his shoulders, and Mom trailed along with us, and I had my fish pole. And believe it or not, on that one day, I caught 25 fish out of that little creek. And I've never caught more than 1 or 2 out of that creek, or even out of East Valley Creek after that.
Do you know if they were brook trout or if they were bull trout, or?
I don't know. I suppose they were just little brook trout.
Uh-huh.
But all I knew was that a fish, and it was fun.
So the family did take some outings like that, and was that all hiking or just walking, or how did you get up there?
Well, we could, at that time, drive through the meadows and get up to where the East Valley breaks up into streams, and we would stop there and we'd hike up the creek.
So that was the old sheep trail, I think they called it, for the sheep herders to get up in there. And along the lines of animals, did you ever see much for animals of any kind up in there?
Well, maybe up in there. One time I was hunting up on the ridge above Valley Creek, and I saw a huge elk, but he disappeared before I could even get ready.
And that was when you were younger?
No, that was when I got old enough to start hunting.
Okay, okay. So I'm curious. Did you and your brother get assigned chores? Did you start having responsibilities and chores up at the summer home at Valley Creek Mine?
You bet. One of them was a very unpopular chore. We had a refrigerator there, and in the breakfast morning, in the noon, and at night, we had to go up to that refrigerator to get our food. Do you know what that refrigerator was?
What was it?
There's an old mine tunnel. And we'd walk way back in where it was cold, and by the time we got back to Mom's cooking, it was still cold, but it was still quite a tedious job to take our time away from our fun and go up there.
Sure. And to go into that mine tunnel,
Yes,
way back in there.
yep.
That's great. Okay. That was probably your least favorite chore, maybe?
Yeah. The next one in agony was much closer, because we always wanted clean, cold drinking water. And we would take a hike up to the #1 tunnel. It was all caved in, but there was a little stream coming out of it with ice cold water. And so every meal one of us had to go up and get a gallon of water.
All right. So you didn't have drinking water right there at the house. Your best water was up at the #1 mine.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Do you remember what Stanley was like in those early years?
Well, I'll tell you this. When my dad invited his brothers and their companions up there, my dad's brother said, "How in the world are we going to find Stanley, or find where we could get in touch with my dad?" And he was totally oblivious. He thought Stanley was a metropolis. And his daughter, Melva, said, "You can find him. He's always got a shovel tied to the front bumper of his car." Well, then they got up there and they found 8 or 10 houses, and that was it.
Uh-huh.
And, that brings up another little story. I'll have to think of his name. Gillespie had the store and the post office.
Mm-hmm.
And true to form, every year he would have somebody catch a little cub bear or two. And this particular year, he had 2 cub bears chained to the front of his store, because it attracted people to come up and give them bottles of pop or candy, or, so they were spending money on him. And one day, his little boy got too close to the bear. To one of the bear.
Gillespie's boys?
I think it was his boy.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, the bear grabbed his arms around him, and he licked his face off. He had chocolate all over his face. And as soon as he got his face clean, the bear set him down, and he went off playing.
That's great. Did they have names for any of those bear cubs that they kept tied up?
They probably did, but I don't remember them.
All right. Okay. So, do you remember what an estimate of the population of Stanley? You said maybe 8 or 10 houses. The population of Stanley in those younger years, it must have seemed very small to you compared to Blackfoot.
Oh, yes. Yes, I think that, well, they had the old hotel, and they had 5 or 6 houses. I probably think that they only had maybe 50 or 60 people in Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that was in Dogtown, and in Squawtown, they had about that many more.
Did the road out to Valley Creek, did it go over Nip and Tuck from Squawtown, or did it go west from Dogtown to get out there in the early days?
All I can say about that was that we would go up a road, and the let's see, we would take, there were no real roads out there.
So did you go through the old ranches and farms?
Yes.
Okay, so that was
We went
probably...
up past the M-Bar-M and 2 or 3 ranches and houses, and forded the creek. We had no bridges up there at that time.
Right, so you were actually going up what they call Cow Lane now, the old Valley Creek Road that went past the various farms and ranches
Yes,
out there.
yes.
Okay. Were there any people or any families or any names of folks that your family associated with, or maybe did things with, or activities with? Or were you
Just the people that we invited up.
just the people that you invited up? And did you invite people from Stanley, or just folks coming up from Blackfoot, or?
Well, it was mostly my relatives.
Relatives.
My uncle and his family from down in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. And can you describe what your home was like out there, that summer home that you stayed in? What was that home like?
well, do you know that cabin where where Stan's bikes are now stored?
Yes.
That was the first cabin we had.
Uh-huh.
We moved into that. There was no door, no screens, nothing but flies and mosquitoes. And Dad finally got some, I'll call it screen, but it was screen with plastic on it. And we screened in the door and the windows. That was our first. And then Bill Soule, when my mom took upon herself to do some cooking for the miners that we had working for us each summer, why, he moved out of his cabin, which is now the only existing log cabin, and
Were those like, to you, were they like 2-room cabins? Were they?
one room. We had places where we got into a corner and went to bed. And let's see. My dad, one night, heard a scuffle. He put the flashlight up and took the .22 and shot a rat out of the rafters.
Uh-huh. So I'll bet your mother worked really hard even in the summer out there.
She did. And she had a real solid rule that as long as we were young, we were confined to that exact area. And she made it up to us by having goodies for the chipmunks. And she would give us a bunch of cookies or something, and we'd entice those chipmunks. Well, first of all, they'd start out some distance away. And as we got through the summer, we'd have them come right up and sit on our hands and eat the goodies. And one day my little brother decided that he was going to do something different. His chipmunk came, fed out of his hand, and then went back into the tall grass. And when the chipmunk got into the tall grass, Stan thought, well, I'll scare him back out and he'll come back. And the grass was that tall. He shot his BB gun and no chipmunk. And he waited and waited, and finally he went down to see what was wrong, and he had hit that chipmunk with that BB gun, and he could have never hit it if he had been trying.
He tried.
He just felt real blue about that.
Oh, yes. So I think the mill probably had some generators for some power, but did the home, your home or Bill Soule's home, did you have any conveniences like that at all? Anything like electricity?
When I was born, we had a nice little country home. It was very small. We had telephone, we had power. In fact, my dad's business required him to have a telephone because he could call his customers and, let's see, when I was born, we had moved, when I was born, we were living in that little tiny home. My grandparents were there, helping to take care of us, and oh golly.
So you had phone and some electricity in Blackfoot.
We did there.
And so then when you came up here for your mother and you and your brother, there wasn't those kind of conveniences out at Valley Creek, was there?
That is correct, absolutely. We had running water that came down the creek,
Mm-hmm.
and we had the situation that's out talked about up in the mountain.
Uh-huh.
But when we first got there, it was bleak.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, eventually we got a coal oil lamp, and then we got a kerosene lamp, and eventually a white gas lamp. That came a long time afterwards.
And that was progress.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And anyway,
So did you did go up and go fishing, you went up the East Fork of Valley Creek and things like that. Did you ever come to the town of Stanley for any kind of entertainment? Or what about doing things like laundry and bathing? Did you ever come to the Stanley Plunge, or did you ever go to the hot springs?
we, after we had been there for a while, we did go to the, I guess the plunge was that little swimming pool.
That little pool, yes.
Yeah. We did that. We did that for a while, and Susan remembers it going there.
Uh-huh.
But we, let's see. Then the hippies came in.
Uh-huh.
You know what the story of the swimming pool
They,
was then.
they did away with it after that happened.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So tell me this, in all that time up there at the cabins, at the mine, did you ever have early snowstorms? Did you ever have cold? Was it always nice and sunny and beautiful, or were there any hardships in the weather, like before you went back to school, or?
We were pretty well covered by that. We got out of school on the end of May, and we started the 1st of September. And so we had school during those months.
So you didn't, in the early days, you didn't witness the weather or the severity of the weather in the Stanley country.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was colder than others, and sometimes we got a snow on the 4th of July. And Susan was remembering one time after she had gotten her own family started, we went up there on snowshoes and skis, and we could dig in, you know, through 8-foot drifts and get down into the cabin. But this one time, we started out to go home, and we were all going side by side, except a couple of kids on their skis were way ahead of us, and we saw tracks. And Susan said, I'm going to get to my kids. And she caught up to them and got clear to the car without having an encounter.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But we would go up in the wintertime during a holiday, New Year's or whatever, and dig our tunnel down to the cabin and so forth.
Well, it's no simple journey to get in there in the winter time, for sure. I'm curious, if we go back to the summers there, were there, I know that Bill Soule was there and your family was there. Were there other workers working the mine for your father, Fred? Were there
Yes, in the summertime when they could get out, he would have 1 or 2 miners preparing the place for showing. He'd work in the glory hole and finding the bodies of ore, so that he'd have a talking point when he brought people up to look at it.
In the early years, was the mill still functional, or was the mill was already gone?
The big stamp mill was there for a long time, but I'll have to tell you, I don't think that mill ever crushed more than a ton of rocks, because I think that either the Depression came on and the miners moved out, or the big money interests in the East maybe spent all their money. But the reason I say the mill didn't do much is that I know what the current mill did when the dam broke. We had tailings all the way down to where they had a secondary dam, and tailings that deep and almost up to the cabin door. And in fact, you can go down there to where we've got our rail bridge now, or rails now, and you can go just under that rail, and there's still tailings that deep.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't think that mining company ever did mine more than just just a truckload or two. That's my opinion. But I know that there were no big, massive tailing ponds.
So essentially, it wouldn't matter whether it was your father, Fred, or whether it was Frank Gunnell. There was never any real success or never any real glory hole that produced a lot, would you say?
We produced a lot.
Of gold. I guess I'm...
Well, I guess they were making money.
Mm-hmm.
They were busy mining right up until the war.
The war, yes.
And then everything shut down, except we had a couple of men hired to stay at the mine to protect things.
Just kind of security?
As security.
And did the government close your operations down, or did it just close down because there wasn't any demand for gold, there was more demand for strategic metals?
There was absolutely blockades, not physical, but economic deterrence. There was no more manpower because they all went to the war effort, whether they were soldiers, whether they were involved in making guns and so forth. And there was no gasoline. I mean, everything was rationed. And for some reason my dad was able, with his traveling, that he could make his travels with what little gas they gave him. And you couldn't buy a new car, you couldn't buy gas unless you had a coupon. And so the war just cut everything on just like that.
Okay.
Wasn't there a fire too, Dad?
Pardon me?
Wasn't there a fire too at the mill?
Yeah, was there ever anything that devastated the mill or devastated any of the buildings or anything, like a fire or a bad winter or...
Okay. The men that we had hired, or the miner that the company had hired, went to town for a party. And they got there, and a big storm blew in, according to their words. I'm not saying that they were telling the truth, but they were supposed to be watching that property. Then they had their party, and a big storm, and several days later, when they got back to the property, a fire had ensued and had burned the mill. And I don't think anybody ever questioned them. They wouldn't have done them any good if they had taken them to prison, because they were responsible. But anyway, then when the war ended, we got up there, the first ones up there after the holiday, and lo and behold, the mill pond had broken loose. And there was tailings that deep all over our whole parking area.
Hmm.
We couldn't even drive all the way in.
Uh-huh.
And it was nothing but a mucky mess. I don't remember if we took our shoes off and waded in with stocking feet, or if we went in with our shoes. But we went through that whole mucky mess to get up to the cabin, which fortunately hadn't been touched.
Uh-huh.
And so then Stan and I had an all-summer vacation.
Hmm.
First of all, we had to go to the old mill and get loose boards and bring for a walkway. And you'd step on a board, and in the muck it'd twist on you. Well, we got the first board across, and then the second. Then it started to get a little bit easier. And after a little while, we got to where we could start using some of that water that's coming down the creek from the number one, and we would make little streamlets, and we would wash that silt away and make a dry trail, or a wet trail it was. But anyway, we got on the dry ground. But it took us all summer long to get that parking area free from all that muck.
So, in other words, you didn't have any heavy equipment like a Caterpillar tractor or plow or anything to
We
move
had
all
nothing.
that. No
had
equipment like
nothing.
that. Yeah. Mhm. Okay. And so, when you were doing that, was your father then trying to still do assessment or work up at any of the open pit or any of the mine?
I'm sure that he was.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember, but I know that he was always busy.
And so that was post-war. That was after World War II.
Yeah,
And so by that time, you must have been starting to get up there in the years, thinking about your own life and what you were going to do. What became of you and your, for instance, you and your brother? What did you start doing after World War II?
well, actually, I almost think that some of that muck was during World War II.
Uh-huh.
But we actually had to make a new, or get a new driveway up the hill to get through that stuff. Because it's still,
So did you make the new road that's up higher?
yes,
The higher road had.
we had it hired
Uh-huh.
to get the job done.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course it keeps sloughing off and you're more sloping than ever, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I think Stan must have been like 5 or 6, and I like 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a summer full of muck, but Dad still saw to it that we had a little recreation.
Great. Great. Okay. So now your father probably worked there basically clear up until he was elder, and you being the older brother, you took to the mine and the mining yourself, right?
Yes, Dad always kept an eye open on the mine. He'd always go up in the morning and talk to the miners and learn what they were doing. But in the afternoon, he always saw to it that we had some kind of recreation. And we'd go fishing or going up into other areas, up to the old dredge, you know, Sunbeam Dam and all that kind of stuff. And he saw to it that our afternoons were free to do what we wanted to do. And as we got older, we expanded on our fishing and finally get higher and higher. And
So you probably traveled around the countryside here a fair bit, and did you ever go up into the Sawtooth? Did you ever do any of that kind of hiking? Or the mountains were always there. Did you ever go up into them?
I've been on top of, and I forget the names, but the top of the one above Stanley Lake.
Okay.
And in fact, I had a couple of buddies with me, a brother and a buddy. We got up on top and we wanted to take a picture, and there was such a steep incline that I had to ride a pony ride on the rocks that I could get far enough away that I could take the picture. And so I took the picture, and while I was up there I saw a billy goat way off in the distance. I almost had to have my binoculars to see it. I was excited about that. But anyway, that old mountain was pretty rocky.
Pretty rugged, huh?
Yeah.
So back in the old days, there was a lot of salmon fishing, and there was a lot of recreation. Kind of became a big thing post-war. Was there ever salmon in Valley Creek up there by the mine?
You bet. I had one of my teenage buddies up there with me, and he'd been there for 2 or 3 summers. And we were fishing below Stanley, or below Valley Creek, down on the road between Valley Creek and Buckskin. And I said, "Hey, there's a salmon in there." He said, "You're putting me on." "No, there's a salmon under that bank." And so he was going to prove it to me. And he got down on his belly and reached under the bank, and that big old salmon came slithering out. And he never doubted me after that.
I'll guess not, yes.
And Colleen, my wife, we were going up that old road, up past those VMRM and so on. And she saw one in one of those little tiny ditches. And my mother was on her way out. You know, she was just like me, a car-bound person. So Colleen jumped out and grabbed a hold of that fish to show my mom. And the fish turned around and bit her. And she was in relief from that time on.
All
She
right.
had a pretty nasty sore for quite a while.
Well, you mentioned Colleen, and so I really have to ask, What time in your life did you decide that there was more than this, the trips up here with your family? What time in your life did you get married and start making a family and bringing them up here?
Well, I thought I was going to be an old bachelor because I couldn't find a girl that even fit my specifications. I was 27 years old, and like I say, I had given up, and I went into the profession of the Boy Scouts of America and was assigned to the Bear River, anyway, the
Council?
yeah, and so I decided to go to a Scouters meeting, actually a Scouters meeting for the church. We used to get together once every year for scouting and youthful activities. And my district chairman was a real good friend. And so I invited him to go with me to that meeting because he was involved as well. And so we got together, and he said, would you mind if I invited my sister to go with me? My sister and my mother, or my sister and my wife. Well, sure, come ahead. And so we went to that meeting. It was a huge meeting, and they had American flag so big that it practically covered the stadium. And so anyway, I took him down to Bear Lake, or down to Salt Lake, and he introduced me to Colleen, and we went to this meeting. And I knew it was going to be a long, hard meeting, so I took an air mattress with us to sit on. And every once in a while, somebody would get tired of sitting, they'd stand up, and everybody would calm down. Anyway, that was in June. And come the 4th of July, I was free from my scouting duties for a little while, for a day or two. And so I questioned him, is your sister going to be down there? Oh, you bet. And anyway, we got together on the 4th of July, and we were going to go on a picnic after church. And lo and behold, an insurance agent dropped in on him and his wife. So I said, hey, why don't we just go for a little walk until they're through? Well, we went on a little walk. We got down to the ranch, which is a mile from the road. And it was a nice sunshiny day. And we sat there and we talked. And I started asking her questions. And anyway, I guess my questions were quite pointed. Because she finally said, are you asking me to marry you? I said, well, I Yes, that's right. So after the 2 weekends, we got together and we went down and were talking, and the picnic finally arrived. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I told her that after we had decided that this was the thing to do, I said, now, why don't you start preparing for the marriage, and we'll get married after I get through this a scouting trip to the East, one of the big universities. She said, oh, why do we have to wait for that? So I loaded her in the car with that scouting thing and went to the East.
All right.
And we've had our ups and downs and questions, but we both keep hanging in there.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And so then you got to introduce your new wife, Colleen, over time to the Valley Creek Mine.
Absolutely.
And you've been coming back there ever since.
Yes.
And how long has that been?
57 years. 57 years.
57 years.
57 years you've been bringing Colleen and your family back to the Valley Creek Mine.
Yep.
You've seen a lot of changes, but you kept right on doing work and assessment and things up at the mine. Is that right?
Well, I didn't do the work at the mine.
You didn't do the assessment work?
My dad took care of that.
Okay.
Western Gold, wasn't it, Dad? He
Oh, it was Western Gold before the war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Gold and Maple came in after the war. Western Gold had walked out from the time after of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And Gold and Maple came in and they said, hey, we can't process the ore here on Valley Creek anymore. We've got to have it go to a processor. And he got a substantial bridge built that would haul those ore trucks. Then he ran out of money. And we stewed about that for a while. And finally, he said, now we've got the money. And then we got the word from the government that the rules had changed, that we could no longer take ore to that particular place, but we had to take it to another processor. And he was disappointed, but then before he could even start to do anything more on the bridge, we got word that now you had to do very expensive things to get ore to move. But only a few days later, they came and said, you can't process the ore unless you haul it out of state. And of course, by that time, the processing expenses were so horrendous that we we didn't even consider it. And so, anyway, let's see.
So, over the years, like for instance, in the in the 70s or in the 80s? Was there any golden maple or any other mining activity that was hauling, or was it just too expensive to haul?
Just too expensive to haul.
Okay.
And then too many heavy demands.
Environmental constraints, maybe?
Yes.
So up at the mine, there's, excuse me, I have a sneeze coming. Excuse me. Up at the residences there, the two nice cabins across the creek, and then there's the big one sits up kind of on the rise there. The house that's up on the rise, is that in your family or is it someone else?
By the time that came around,
Mm-hmm.
the only three of us that were still alive were Stan, Alice, and me. And the two cabins that were for the cook and the mine representative from the before the World War days,
Mm-hmm.
they those two cabins were moved down to where they now stand. They were the frame cabins. I took the one that was unfinished because I had ideas as to how I wanted to finish it. And Stan, or Alice, took the one by the parking lot, and she's totally redone it. And then Stan wanted the old, or the bunkhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was full of sand and silt. I'm not sure. But anyway, he took that over and cleaned it up and redid some of it and put a ramp in so that he could get up and down because he's off worse than I am. But that's the story of the Valley Creek Mine.
Yes, very good story. I'm curious if you have any particular stories or remembrances, maybe about wildlife or maybe about individual people or any people other than your father and mother that may have impacted your life out there. Did you have any connection with any old timers? Do you, for instance, Bill Soule, Soule, yes. Did you have any particular remembrances of him? Or I know the fish pond, which I'm not sure where that fish pond was. Where was his?
Do you know where that snow machine sits?
Mm-hmm.
It's just over there, up from that.
Oh, okay.
Out in those willows.
Right there in the willows, then.
And the willows weren't there. That is, the pond was free of willows.
Right.
But the willows extended into the
Grew
other
into it. Okay. Yeah.
area.
I understood that he was a jack of all trades, Bill was, and that he was involved in a lot of different mines, and that he also was quite a photographer. I just wondered if you had any remembrances of him outside of his fish pond.
Absolutely. He was quite a free and easy guy to get around. He had really gone up, you know, the Red Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
He had staked claims up there and would go up there every summer to claim those properties.
Okay.
And he,
And those weren't patented claims like the
No.
Valley Creek. Those were just ones that he had to do
had
his
to keep the claim
keep
up.
his claim up. Uh-huh.
And well,
That had to be a really rugged trip up into there.
yes. And he then would go up into the Sawtooth with his camera. And you gotta be he was a little man, but he would take these big, crazy cameras that would start out here and chuck pictures around, you know. In fact, there at your
The museum, there are some
Museum.
of his panoramic photographs.
Yeah.
Yes.
and I really was unhappy with my sister because she did not even give me the chance to get copies of those.
Hmm.
And she gave me a couple of pictures that I don't know yet where they came from, up in the Sawtooth somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Because they don't mean a thing to me because I wasn't there.
Right, right. Now, Bill was renowned for his photography in those days,
Oh, yeah.
and we're always on the lookout for some of his images because they were very special.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah, I've still got those two pictures, but I don't know what they are. I mean, they're Sawtooth, but
Uh-huh.
they're not anything I'm acquainted with.
Aha. All right. Well, I know you took a lot of notes. I was wondering if you had any particular stories or any particular things that you'd like to mention.
Well, I remember the first trip into Bull Trout Lake
Uh-huh.
after it had been discovered.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember going up there with my dad and sitting on the logs, a whole raft of logs. I was kind of squeamish about that,
Uh-huh.
but you could really catch a bunch of bull trout fish.
There were a lot of bull trout then.
Oh, yeah. And they were big. And,
What was big to you then? How big were they?
probably 18 inches long.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And one of the times we went up there to fish, why, I wasn't with them, but you had to cross a couple of three little streams. And my dad, bless his heart, he stepped into one of those streams and it flipped him and he landed on his side and he had a real dickens of a time getting out of that trough.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. All those summers that you came to Stanley, do you remember any big forest fires? Were there ever any big forest fires?
I don't recall any.
Okay.
Tell about your fire drills, Dad.
We did have some fire drills. And
That was for in case something happened up there?
yeah, we, Dad would tell us if we got into a fire, get into the grassiest place with the most water running, and if necessary, lay down in the creek and cover your face.
Mm-hmm.
He was quite interested in that.
He was concerned for your safety up there if a fire did happen. Uh-huh.
Yes. And we did have a fire happen up there. Colleen and I were up there. Were you up there, Susan?
Just right after you got it out.
Okay. But we were up there and we had a fire in the stove. It just erupted immediately. It was going up the chimney and out into the roof. And I hollered at Mom, Colleen, get some water. Well, we had quite a bit of water already there. I was sloshing water on it, and she came and started to help me. She got more memory of that than I have, but we got the fire out.
Mhm.
But it was really a hot one.
It didn't spread to any trees above the cabin or anything.
No.
Yeah. Because those cabins are tucked right down in the trees where it certainly
They are.
could have. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Let me see.
So a couple of more questions that I'm really interested in. What did you do for going to church?
We didn't,
You didn't.
except when we were
Back in Blackfoot. So up here
Uh,
you didn't have church and didn't
up
come to
here,
town or anything.
after we got situated as adults. We would go to church a few times at the Chalice.
Mhm.
But then when the church started in Stanley, then we came here all the time. And I wound up being one of the teachers, and you know, my dad wasn't a church man, so we did a lot of investigating of places to have fun.
So you did recreation things, and that's good too. That's fine. That's great. What about if anyone got hurt? There wasn't any simple thing to do if anyone got hurt out there. You didn't have any medical thing you could come to, did you?
My wife got sick one time, and my youngest son was up there for a quick vacation, and I quickly got them into the car and took them to the hospital up in Haley. And she was determined that I wasn't going to ruin this boy's vacation, and she insisted that I come back and take him for a 3-day vacation before I went back and got her.
Well, I think there's probably some more stories or some more thoughts you might have, so I'll let you check your notes there in case there's anything that you're missing.
Let's see what I've got.
Dad, did you want to tell about your job trapping the mice with your BB gun?
Oh. My mom was just like this girl, scared to death of mice. Wanted to have a thing to do with them. But when we got into that cabin, there were mice everywhere. And we only had a little table that was made out of 3 cut-off poles and boards. My mother would sit on that table, eat, there's one, you know, and they were all over that place. Well, my brother and I would sit up at night, and we'd just sit there shooting at the mice with our BB guns. I don't think we ever hit one.
Uh-huh.
But one time when I was a little guy, maybe I've said this, but we were up there with my dad, and he heard something in the rafters, and he shined his light up, he took his .22, and he shot down a pack rat.
I wondered if you had much pack rat issues. Remember what the pack rats sound like and what they smell like?
I remember they look and smell, but I don't remember what it was like.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondered if you had very many pack rats there.
We didn't have too many.
Did you have anything like problem with the bears or problem with the wolverine getting into the cabins or anything like that?
Well, we had some interesting bear problems. Not really problems, but excitement. We kept our food in the cabin. We would, well, I was working until midnight sometimes, and you'd hear something on the porch. You'd take a flashlight, shine out the window, and right pointed against the window here, and me there was a big black bear. And that wasn't unusual.
Mm-hmm.
We have a cooler box that was out by the willows, and a bear got into that. He stuck his claws into the lid, lifted the lid up, and got the goodies.
Mm-hmm.
So that much we did know. Another thing that happened to us, it was on a cold September morning. We had gotten up to go to church, and we, I think it was Colleen that went out to the car, and she came scurrying back. We've got bear problems. And so anyway, we went out, and the bear had sunk his claws into the window and ripped the window out. You probably got into that,
Mm-hmm.
and then he tried to get into the trunk, but didn't make that. But he was trying to get the smell of the fish that I had caught the day before. He had sunk his claws into that. Let's see, he pulled the back seat down so that you couldn't even hardly get your hand between the seat and the back to get into that thing. Anyway, we went to church that morning with a broken window, bitter cold, and I think we had to go all the way into Blackfoot, or Pocatello, wherever we were living at the time, to get the car fixed.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And we've still got that car. It's running. It only takes short trips to town and to these kids, and it's got what, almost 300,000 miles on it.
That's great. Well, I'm curious, just kind of in closing from my point of view, I was able to go out there and do bear trapping for you a couple times, removed a couple of bears. I'm wondering if you had any encounters or activities or connections with any Forest Service people or any other game wardens before my time.
No, I don't think so.
Did the Forest Service ever come out there to contact you or to see how things were going or to check on the mining, or did you ever have any issues with the Forest Service?
I don't think we had any issues with them until they started changing rules.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And we I don't know. You had some of the big round traps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think you were probably one of the earlier ones.
Great.
But,
Okay. Well, I always like to ask if folks that have been around a good long time had good relations with the Forest Service and with the Fish and Game, because our museum and our oral history collection is tied with the Forest Service, and of course with the Fish and Game is separate. But I have fond memories of working on the bear complaints out there. And I do remember very well when they got into the mischief out there.
yeah, I don't know that we had too many problems that way, but I do know that the Forest Service was greatly expanded just to bring in the Valley Creek Mine.
Mm-hmm.
To bring it under their control.
Under their control, I see. Yeah.
And we've seen quite a few bears up there.
Dad, tell how you stored your food before the bears showed up in the creek and in that box on the side. You know, your refrigerator box.
The screen cooler box, I remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had that screen box, and once in a while they'd get dripped into.
Yeah.
That one time I mentioned about the bear face to face, Grandma saw it first. Hollered at me. I was getting out of the bathtub.
Uh-huh.
But I really wasn't too awfully concerned about bears.
Maybe less so than your wife, huh? Yes. Well, I thank you very much. And if you have anything on there that you'd like to
Yeah,
say, that'd be just fine.
let's see. Well, we built the first bridge across Valley Creek. We called it Splash Bridge because Dad fell into the creek when he was building the bridge.
Is that the bridge that was straight across from the road to the mine rather than the one that's clear on down? There was a bridge right across the creek from the road to the mine. Is that one?
No,
The road used to go on the buckskin side.
That was the second bridge.
yeah. Ooh. Actually, we had to ford the creek
Mm-hmm. Okay.
every time we went up there. And we had to make a corduroy bridge across that swamp to get up there. And then we built a bridge across the swamp where it crosses Valley Creek,
Mm-hmm.
2 miles down.
Right.
And we could only use that when that meadow dried up. So we had a lot of experience going across that ford. And, let's see here. Buckskin Mine Road was only put in when the buckskin had been associated with the Valley Creek Mine.
Ah. Okay.
And that was a beastly bumpy road. I put it out an oil pan on that
Uh-huh.
road. The ball mill we talked about, it was destroyed by fire.
Fire.
we didn't mention the Golden Maple. They only got a bridge across before they ran out of money, and then they got stalled by problems. I think our biggest problem was when we had to first ship the ore to the processor, and then before the mining company got their funds in order, why the rules had changed, and we then had to go into a more secluded place. And within weeks of that time, we still had to go into more secluded places, and then eventually to eliminate ore transportation at all in Stanley.
Okay.
But that just about tells you what I know about it.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. It's exceptionally good information, and we really appreciate your